ABC, Eagle Broadcasting Corporation. Ito ang Radyo Agila. DCEC 1062 sa Mega Manila, WIM 1080 sa Northern Luzon, DZEL 1260 sa Southern Taga, UYFX 1305 sa Visayas, at DXED 1224 sa Southern Mindanao. Ito ang Radyo Agila. Mabilis, malakas, pumapagaspas.
Ang oras na ito ay hatid sa inyo ng Cable Link, your link to a world-class entertainment.
Mga bagong kaalaman sa siyensiya at teknolohiya. Alamin sa programang Pinoy Scientist. Tuwing Linggo, alas 5 ng hapon hanggang alas 6 ng gabi. Pinoy Scientist. KBP Best Science and Technology Radio Program. Pinoy Scientist. Dito sa Radyo Agila.
Magandang linggo po sa lahat ng mga tagapakinig dito po sa Pinoy Scientist. Welcome na naman po sa ating paboritong biyahe sa kinabukasan. Dito lang po sa DZEZ 1062 Radyo Agila. Ako po si Dr. Custer Diocaris, ang inyong kabarangay Pinoy Scientist. At kasama ko po si Professor Sherman. Hello, Sherman!
Hi, Caster. Good afternoon. Ganun din sa tagapakinig lahat ng aming programa Pinoy Scientist. Good afternoon.
Okay, Prof. Sherman, medyo big time ang ating mga guests ngayon. Dalawa pa, ha?
Yes, oo. Yep, antayin natin sila. Sa Washington kasi sila ngayon So basically, it's around 5 a.m. for now.
So pag-usapan muna natin mga headlines ngayon. What can you say about, itong mga headlines natin sa flood control and corruption? Kasi we're gonna talk about later a new index, right? Yung sa geopolitical index ng ECGI, which includes economic, crime, corruption, and geopolitics in one index. That would be very interesting. What can you say about itong nangyayari sa atin?
Yeah, I've been following this through over, several weeks as well. And it's been crazy, really. Like it's a total mess, if I would say, Caster, coming from the statements of the DPWH secretary. Yeah, it's a total mess. I don't know, right? But I think they do have a plan. We will see as the issue evolve.
Diba, pinag-uusapan natin tungkol sa futures thinking. Ito ay isang, wildcard event. Hello, Sherman.
Yep, Caster, just a couple of minutes. I'll just have to answer a call.
Okay. So, ngayon po ating pag-uusapan mamaya ang tungkol sa, geopolitical index na sinasabi. And, when we talk about the future, foresight, hindi lang to tungkol sa predicting yung technology o mga ekonomiya. Tungkol din po ito sa governance, integrity, and the courage para mag-isip tayo ng long term. Sherman, are you still there? Oh, okay. He's still on phone. Ayun. So, dito, pag-uusapan natin ng mga bigger and broader questions. Ngayon. Kasi before, in the previous meetings or in previous episodes, pinag-usapan natin mga impact ng AI, impact ng sa mga startups. This time, napag-usapan namin ni Professor Sherman. Let's talk about politics. Okay, Prof. Sherman, are you there?
Yes. So Asanga just gave me an update. He is about to join us.
Oh, good.
There you go.
Okay, so alam mo, Prof. Sherman, when we talk about futures thinking, it's long-term, right? And what's happening right now in our country is yung mga politicians natin, they're all thinking about short-term gains and self-interest. So how do you think that would affect the way, if we have a futures thinking, paano mo nakikita na ang mga politiko natin ay mag-iisip tungkol sa kanilang kinabukasan at sa kinabukasan ng bansa?
Yeah, if you come to think about it, especially when institutions are really short-termistic, it is a constraint.
Yes.
It prohibits anticipation, especially in the long-term context. It is really a weight The question has always been about, how do we shift,
Mm-mm.
the paradigm, the mindset, for our political leaders, to change the way they see things, especially those that are, essential to national security, economic growth, social welfare, public health. When every time we explore solutions, to our current problems, the premise is always short-termistic. And you know what, Caster, there is a research that correlates short-termism and self-interest.
Okay.
Ang mga tendency ng mga taong sarili lang nakapakanan ng iniisip at pang-interest, ang iniisip talaga is yung ngayon eh. Short-term interest when it comes to power. Paano ko ba ma-consolidate itong power na ito? And ang mga outcome na niyan, of course, indicator niyan, alam natin, corruption.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But you see, ganyan din mag-isip din ang karamihan sa mga botante natin na lalo na sa pagdating ng eleksyon ay sino-sino bang bumoboto, tayo-tayo rin. At kadalasan itong mga bumoboto, minsan na, well, hindi naman natin lalahat, nabibigyan din to ng konting ayuda. And that's why they voted for that particular candidate. So, on both sides, we're talking also about short-term gains and the lack of future foresight.
Yes, that's true. No, as you mentioned, one of the reasons for that is, of course, the voting culture and behavior that you have, and definitely the systems enables that. If you have a system that just allows, this kind of
Mm-mm.
illegal, practices going on when it comes to, election day. At in fact, if you come to think about it, walang electoral enforcement na sinasabi. So nagre-rely lang tayo, no, from all the parties involved to sue each other. And there's no one particular institution that actually enforce this laws when it comes to election unless someone filed these cases. So it's open, really.
Mm-mm.
It's
Mm-mm.
open, and it's affecting our the future of our democracy. Di ba? Meron nga nagsabi, no? It's an Indian philosopher
Mm.
that if you don't get to check all of these things, what you're gonna have is phulocracy, not democracy, a government of the fools, by the fools, and for the fools. So, ganun ang mangyayari. If that becomes, the voting practices, electoral practices, sisirain niya lahat, Caster,
Mm-mm.
no? Lahat sisirain niya.
Teka muna, ikaw ay isang futurist, so there are several scenarios. Ano ang nakikita mong scenario? In the Manoa scenario, are you seeing a collapse in the sa Philippines with all these things happening, or are you going to expect a transformational
I,
change?
I, I would say, collapse is already here.
No, okay.
It's no longer in the future. We're living it. Unless we talk about it, that you don't get to realize that we are already living in a collapsed world. Di ba? There wouldn't be any national protest against corruption if we're not in a collapse scenario. The news headlines that we currently have, corruption is everywhere. Isn't that collapse, Caster, no? So that is collapse. Here's the thing, Caster, no, just a few words before we
Oh, I
ask
see
Asanga to come in,
Asanga already here.
is,
Hello. Okay.
there's this book called Collapse. And there are indicators, two
Mm-mm.
or three, that the best I can remember, that you can use as an indicator if a society is already living in a collapsed society. One is, ang explanation niya, the reason why you are living in a collapsed society is simply because I think this is very compelling. It's the outcome of the choices of your elites. You know? Ang power and decision making nasa elite yan eh, whether in business, corporation, government, civil society, among other things, especially in the political sector. So the outcome of any political collapse is in fact the result of the decision of your political elites. And what drives that is short-termism. Second, in the context of power, sinabi niya, kung nag-aaway-away ang mga elite mo,
Mm-mm.
when they are competing for resources, they are
Yes.
competing for power between amongst them, that's collapse. And the third one, if your elite is insulated from accountability, yun yung sinasabi niya. So if all of these three compelling factors, among other things that he mentioned, a society is already living in a collapsed world. Now, however, sinasabi niya, collapse is also can catapult a society towards transformation. Minsan ang collapse is a trigger towards transformation. So if people get to realize that they are already living in a collapsed world and they want to challenge the power and culture that is evident in any particular society, magproprotesta yan. So, and then the role of the creative minority comes in. Like us, for example, public intellectuals of our country and who have the power and capability to organize national protest, can serve, as agents of transformation in a collapsed society. So both, a collapse can, in fact, actually trigger transformation, and that's what we are hoping for.
And
And with that in mind, Castor, let me quickly introduce our good friend
yes.
here. Okay, back to you.
Hello. Okay.
Thank
So just to before we introduce Dr. Zanga, do you think that the tragedy of common is also operating here? Because a lot of poor people or a lot of our countrymen, they're all acting towards their self-interest. And right now, because of all this flood control corruption gates that has exploded, everybody now is talking about collective long-term interest. So what we're seeing here is now a transition from some tragedy of the common that used to be the scenario of the country to something that where everybody now is thinking about long-term goals and how we will all fight corruption collectively. So I think with that, let's now introduce our guest. Kasama po natin ngayon ang isang napakagaling, a bright international security and geopolitics analyst by the name of Dr. Azanga. Sorry if I will mispronounce. I don't know if I'll be mispronouncing this. Abeyaguna Sekara. He is has advised defense ministries, think tanks, and even the IMF. So big picture on all this political corruption thing from the perspective of Dr. Azanga. So welcome to Pinoy Scientist, Dr. Zanga.
you so much. Thank you for having me.
So we've been discussing, Dr. Zanga, about what's happening here. I think a lot of the things that's happening in the Philippines is also reflected in other countries, like one in Nepal, and then we have in Indonesia. So it's maybe something that's an interesting phenomenon. But with that, I'll have you, Sherman, ask the first question.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Asanga, for joining us. Dr. Asanga is a colleague of mine at the Millennium Project. And, the Millennium Project is a global-wide think tank that explores and formulates, develop, various index related to national development, national security, among other things. And one of the recent initiatives of our friends from the Millennium Project, which is led, of course, by Dr. Asanga, particularly with the South Asia Foresight Network. And Dr. Asanga, you've shared to us recently a news about the ECGI. And I think I would like to start by asking you some basic question. What is the economic crime and geopolitical index, and what motivated the creation of the ECGI?
Well, again, thank you so much, Sherman, for having me. So the ECGI, Economic Crime and Geopolitics Index, is an index that looks at two basically areas of of political uncertainty in countries. So basically, so if you look at economic crime has been the biggest issue that has been discussed in many societies. But we only have the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index. It's just a perception only, but nothing sort of wider than that. Wider, what I mean is like about the money laundering, about organized crime, about illicit activities, about elite capture in societies from external forces. So it's sort of a very narrow index what we earlier had, the perception index. So what we did was we added these elements into the economic crime index, which is the new index that we have developed. And we have brought in a very powerful sort of, I would say, an external a vector in which is the geopolitics vector, which most of our countries in South Asia as well as Southeast Asia are going through. This geopolitical, the pressures between the big powers, Philippines, when it comes to China, when it comes to the United States, so the kind of the pressure, the geopolitical influence. So what we did was we coupled these together. The idea was actually conceived during the University of Cambridge Economic Crime Symposium, the 42nd one, which I attended in early September. So bringing geopolitics in is one of the most important thing about this particular index. So now it's been tested in South Asia and Southeast Asia, and Philippines scored about 69.2. Now, how the scaling comes basically is that we do bring in the corruption perception index values also, but we look at three other variables apart from that, which is the economic crime, how the public public response has been, like protests, the number of protests, are they angry about regulations? What is the public perception about the government's policies? So that's the second one. The third is basically the geopolitics, like what I mentioned earlier. So all of these four pillars put with the CPI, we measure these variables, and when it comes, so if a country scores above 70, it means it has a very high risk. For example, Nepal was above 70, Bangladesh was above 70, Sri Lanka was above 70. So all three countries have gone through the full cycle from protests, from regime change. Then you have a new interim government, as well as elections followed by. So it's a kind of a full cycle. So what you saw in Nepal was very strange. So I was in Nepal last year, and Nepal was very high in our value. And because of the anger of the young people against corruption, there's not been a full-term prime minister in Nepal for a very long time. So there was government failure, there was high corruption, there was elite capture. A few elites were ruling the country, only one billionaire in the country. So what we saw was the anger, frustration was very high. The index showed that Nepal was very, very high. When I mentioned last year, that was exactly in November in Cambodia, I was invited for a conference, which country could trigger next. Actually, because of the values that we had, I clearly mentioned about Nepal. But at that time, it was a bit surprising. But now what you see is, something that we have projected has happened. So Philippines is quite high, 69.2. It has not reached there yet, but I would say it is at a critical stage right now.
I was wondering about the methodology of ECGI, or that's Economic Crime, Corruption, Geopolitics Index. Is it does it change every month? Where do you get the data? Are these structured or unstructured data sets that you're working on to crunch the number for ECGI?
So most of the data is from the field research that we engage in directly. We also get data from, like what I mentioned, the CPI index, the democracy index, what is available data. But when it comes to the measures which are quite difficult, which is the geopolitical influence of a country, the number of agreements that the country has signed with big powers, how the other powers see these, agreements, as well as, how basically in Nepal's case, Nepal's support for the Belt and Road Initiative, sort of, as well as how India perceives so these measures kind of change
Mm-hmm.
when countries do commit. For example, Sri Lanka had its first defense pact kind of MOU with India. So basically, the vector jumped about 3 places up in Sri Lanka. That was actually last year, but it doesn't mean that that alone will contribute. But when it comes to the other areas, which is like for example, the CPI, Philippines is much better than Bangladesh, the corruption perception wise. But Indonesia, again, if you look at it, is quite high. Thailand is again at the same equivalent par as Philippines. So around the same sort of. So we have several ASEAN countries which is going into high risk.
Yeah. Can you mention these countries that you had in the report, like 1, 2, or 3?
Yes, clearly. So Thailand, for example, is at 68.9. Then we have, nations like Cambodia has gone above 70.7. So it has crossed to the, so if you look at the South Asian countries, of course, we have, even Myanmar is at 72.6 because of the ongoing crisis and issues and that's going on. Taking Indonesia, for example, Indonesia has scored a very high mark. It is at a very critical point, I would say 75.3, because of the prolonged, again, public anger. The public response has been 7. So we have put a scale of 7 for Indonesia. And also Pakistan has also been the same, around 7. So you could see a very high country. So out of the 9 countries of the high risk, 3 countries have gone through the full cycle, the Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal. So again, this will not give you sort of, we can't accurately say that, okay, this is going to be the next country, but we can indicate that it's going towards a full cycle because of the public anger that is sort of spreading around the country, as well as how the people are responding to government regulations, government policies, as well as the suppression of democracy. Now, Bangladesh was a very clear case of suppression of democracy in there, because you have thousands of people being arrested, hundreds of bloggers being arrested. So you have a government kind of crackdown on basically voices who are critical. Then, but each case is a very unique case, Sherman. What you have to understand is that it gives indication. It requires more sort of public participation for this. The question that was earlier asked, how do we sort of gather this data? We gather from the institutions, from the professionals, from the people who are there. Like in Nepal, for example, several academics there, as well as the people who are there, the ground. So we want to capture the ground data, but then again, we do speak to the government, we do speak to the opposition. So it's a kind of a verification also that we do. It's a cross verification that, okay, can we give about 6 or 7 to this, or can we move the scale a bit down because they have actually improved on transparency, on being open. Now, in Philippines case, which was quite interesting, whether the NGOs as well as the non-governmental organization, can they sort of sustain this, the protests? Now, can they sort of support the protests continuously? Because Philippines has been a case, I mean, right throughout, from various leaders, corruption has been one of the biggest issues in Philippines. So it is the one of the most important, I would say, political tool also for many politicians. So what you have to understand is that now the geopolitical vector coming in is also very interesting. How much of external influences have been used to capture the elites of the country for projects? There is something called the ghost projects, right, in Philippines. So there is ghost projects also in Sri Lanka. It's called the ghost airports, which flights never came, but the airport was built. Here, the entire project is missing. It's only on paper. So there are a lot of similarities, these countries. So what we are trying to do is now bring in more sort of voices for this index from the countries. Like right now, I'm in Thailand, so we try to get more voices from Thailand to sort of add and improve the index. So right now we are on a testing phase until December when our report comes out. So we're trying to gather more public participation for the index to develop it'll be sort of more robust as well as the numbers we can agree on. But right now I mean we get a lot of responses right now. The public has already have seen it as an indicator that shows that political uncertainty is a serious issue for these countries. Even the governments have shown interest in this index. So that's a really good, because the government can work if they are very low in these pillars, some of those, they can work towards, stabilizing these countries.
Okay.
Yeah, just a question, Castor. No,
Okay, go ahead,
as
Chairman.
Dr. Sangha mentioned about each and every country is unique, right? But then appreciating the data that you had that led into this index is, are there any patterns that pushes a country towards medium risk and then later on to high risk?
Yeah, so that's Philippines, what you're talking about. So you're on medium risk right now. You're at the border, 69.2. It's actually, so if you look at it, when we did the calculation initially, so it was around 69.6. We kind of reduced it a bit because of the public response time to time that is coming in. Not a continuous response towards certain aggression, but then again, the NGO background as well as your historical background of corruption. So all of these contributed to move it to sort of in the edge, but it can move into the high if the non-governmental entities as well as the public sort of demonstrations get into out of control of the government use aggression and all that. So in Nepal also, so there is always a point where public gets into a very critical moment where there is no turning back. Even in Bangladesh, that was the case. In Sri Lanka, that was the case. So when government responds, either with the crackdown, of the protests, there's a huge public response. For that, and there's no turning back after that. So government has to understand what's going on right now. It's a new generation. It's called the Gen Z generation in Nepal. In Sri Lanka, it was again mothers, there was kids, there was everybody was walking into these president's palaces. So it's kind of a new, I would say, non-violent protest, kind of a Gene Sharp moment in the history. But then, but it turns into a violent, like in Nepal, like burning the first lady alive inside a house. It becomes really, really, like Bangladesh, where thousands lost their lives. So it moves into kind of violence also. So we measure that. It quickly sort of, if that happens, so you are in the very high risk, and when you're in the high risk, definitely anything could go wrong. So Indonesia right now is in a very high risk. Um, we see a lot of public anger. So I will be traveling to Indonesia also very soon. But it's been sort of developing the pressure, the public pressure as well as anger towards the government. Again, a case of corruption, where some of the society are getting really rich, having a good life with the political backings, while majority are suffering. This is the same thing that I captured in Sri Lanka. If you take 10 people out of that protest ground in Sri Lanka, I mean, 9 out of 10 was saying it's corruption. It is corruption. It is the biggest issue, that and inequality, because they have been poorer. And the first family in the Sri Lankan case have been very rich. They are having lavish lives, stealing from these projects. There's no benefits. There's no jobs created. So why should we not protest? So there's a kind of a fair, um, I mean, democratically looking, look, the governments were elected by these people, so they do have a right to protest if they are poorer, like in Sri Lankan case where there was economic collapse. But Philippines, we don't see that, right? So they like that. So there is some. This is the reason you're on the borderline. So there are improvements, unlike Bangladesh case or Nepal case, in terms of economic side, in terms of geopolitics. I believe there was a, I mean, there's a balance in Marcos's regime that they have managed to, well, because you are at a geopolitically looking, it's at a very, very fragile time right now because of the significant influence that China is bringing to the region, as well as United States from tariffs wise. So, so there is multiple pressure points that how the leader is actually the country's leader or the foreign policy decision makers are balancing this act. So that's very important. We don't understand some countries like for example, like Sri Lankan case, all of a sudden, without the public knowledge, you sign an agreement with India on the defense pact. Now, that could be momentarily that, people would see like, okay, that's just like the government would see like, it's just an agreement, so why you don't worry about it, They just put it aside. But there is anger. There was journalists that I interviewed say that, look, they can't do that. If they are going to sign it, we need to see the agreement. And some of the civil society participants were very angry about it. So I think the government's communication is really important when you're signing these agreements, when you're coming up to these big, massive loans with these countries. I think it requires more sort of accountability now than in the past. Probably those leaders have been in the past and sort of, they're not used to the new sort of the nuance that is going on. It's important to understand the Gen Z thinking in here also. Accountability is one of the key areas. Corruption, fighting corruption. So they don't want to see, in the Sri Lankan case, it was the health minister who was bringing substandard medicine. There was a lot in the Sri Lankan case. Bangladesh was also the same. The ruling, the family was being extremely corrupt. So so you have to understand that these, the public anger has to be taken in very, very seriously in these countries, or else the government would get a huge sort of a response. I mean, from the general public. Actually, changing this government. But there's no point of blaming again external actors, saying that it was done by this particular country, this particular country. There's no point in it because it has already happened. The people have already, identified the government as being extremely corrupt, and we need to, get out of these people. We need to remove these people from office. So before it hits that, our economic crime and geopolitics index helps these countries to understand the risk factor. So that's really important to forecast as and understand from the government side, from the general public, to NGOs, to everybody to understand.
I'd like to ask a question about how often do you update your index? Does this happen every month, every quarter, or is it done every year?
Well, it's we are trying to do this quarterly because of because of the numbers are very dynamic. It's changing almost every week in countries. You'll have a prime minister, you might not have a prime minister, like in the Thailand case. So you might get into a border war. You might end up in huge corruption scandal highlighting, like in the Sri Lankan case, the central bank, the bond scam, big scams coming up. Philippine case, ghost projects, flood related. So these things trigger every week in countries. That's why the problem of the earlier indexes we had, like the corruption perception index, it just gives a perception of a country. Okay, Philippines, for example, in the Philippines case, you are number 33 in 2024, the CPI. Then Pakistan is 27. So Sri Lanka was 32, the numbers they're given. So higher it goes, you are not corrupt, and the lower you are more corrupt. So 33 means is a significant number given, but then it's just a perception only. It does not calculate the other areas. So that's why we try to bring in the numbers. We try to look at the numbers almost quarterly, but then we look at it, I would say, monthly. And when we go to the field, we'll do the field research. If there is any significant input that's been given, for example, journalists, or then we test it across the other stakeholders in the country. And if it is a case that is been to take it very seriously, we take it in immediately.
So okay, before I end my last question, my question here. So once you've released the data, it becomes something like a prescriptive. It provides prescriptive insights to governments and to investors. So how is it being valued, and how do you expect governments to respond to your index?
Well, right now it's out, so you can see from our website, the Millennium Project, as well as we have, as you know, 70 offices around the world, the Millennium Project, more than 70, and Sherman is in one of them. So I'm hoping to visit Sherman very soon in Manila. So what they're doing, so we have given this data to these offices to sort of improve the data, see if there is any mismatches, if there's anything. So we're trying to sort of release the final report in December. And for your question on the investors, that's a very important perspective for the investors also to understand how sort of the country is, working on these pillars, and how this country is working on this area. Now, I've been a technical advisor also to the IMF, International Monetary Fund, after the Sri Lankan crisis, where I contributed as a technical advisor to the IMF to compile the diagnosis report. The diagnosis report is now out on Sri Lanka, so other countries also require diagnosis when you go through the full sort of the cycle from regime change to the elections, and when you diagnose it, you understand what was the real factors that triggered this. And then in the Sri Lankan case, it was governance, failure of governance, as well as systemic corruption, very clearly. Then there are recommendations that is given by IMF or the other international bodies. So it is an important index for the investors to look at, for the government to immediately identify, like, look, we have been very weak in this particular pillar. We need to improve accountability. We need to talk to the young people. We need to reach out. In the Nepal's case, it didn't happen in Nepal. Some of them are very, I would say, I wouldn't use the word arrogant, but they've been kind of in hubris mode because of the majority governments they have. So they think that they're inevitable. The power has been sort of, They ignored in the Nepal case complete ignorance. Because they had the majority seats in the parliament, they have the majority president. Even the Sri Lankan case was the same. The two brothers were ruling the country, the majority political party ruling the parliament. Bangladesh was also the same. So they think that it's that they would remain, and we don't need the external, voices like this. We don't why do we even need, these CPI indexes or economic crime indexes, all this? We don't need it, and because we have the power. But look what happened to all three countries. So governments need to, put down their sort of a hat on this, that hubris they have in their minds, and, their arrogance. So you need to speak with the people, talk to them. Okay, if it's ghost projects, what are the projects? What are the numbers? Where did we go wrong? Admit it, work on it. That's sort of, stakeholder engagement. Certain projects like in Sri Lanka, where the EIA, environment impact assessment, have been not looked at all. So they have gone wrong. The Auditor General has raised multiple questions. So if you're transparent, if you're improving, Singapore, for example, after the ASEAN countries, amazingly has scored very low, one of the lowest. The reason is they've been very clever on communicating, extremely clever on communicating with the people. And they, although, when it comes to the democracy side and all that, of course, Singapore has one newspaper and all. It's a very different city-state environment. But then communication-wise, their leaders have been very, very clearly talking to their people. There's a very sort of an understanding there. So you have nations that have improved on these pillars, and we want the other nations also to improve on public response. If a government is doing the regulations, and if the country's people and the journalists are pointing it out, they're fighting it. For example, the Digital Security Act, DSA, in Bangladesh, they were angry about it. Journalists were pointing towards it. Look, this is a way to arrest us, which is correct. And they were arresting people. So if you're trying to hide, okay, from the international organizations and say, look, we are not arresting, but it's an act to prevent, but it's an act that has been used to suppress human rights. So it's important that immediately we capture that, we put it in our index, but then you work towards it. So we work towards, improving these pillars.
It's just brilliant that you were able to, given the fact that there are many variables that you need to consider when it comes to, determining national security index. And it's just brilliant that you were able to put all of this, together, right? Like economic crime, corruption perception, and geopolitics. These are really good, variables, and you put them together. It's pretty quite unique. It gives you a lot of insights and leverage for conversation when it comes to national security. And given the fact that this is some sort of a national security index, my question to you is, as you analyze what's going on, particularly in Southeast Asia, what has been the role of the military so far in these nations? Has there been a role of the military in
Yes,
in
I
this
mean,
chaos?
yes. So in the geopolitics vector, we look at the role of the military, right? So military agreements, military pressure, what the military is going through. For example, are there any border wars? Are there sort of influence coming in from other countries towards the signing military pacts? Or then again, the use of the military is also another sort of area that we look at. So basically, military is an interesting, I would say, variable, but then it depends on country to country, right? So how the military has been used. Now, in the Sri Lankan case, it was very low on the military, because military, from the history, there's always been, they've drawn a line always when it comes to politics as well as military. So they never got into, we never had military regimes. As well as, although there was pact signed in 1987 with India, multiple geopolitical influence that has come into the country, but in Pakistan case it's a completely different. So there's been many military regimes. Military has stepped in to protect the national security. So it's country to country, but what you raised was a very important area. But yes, South Asian country, if you look at Myanmar right now, is going through a lot, right? So civil war and all that. Quite difficult. I mean, the geopolitics variable is the most difficult variable we have. We did speak about it a much in a broad way. Do we need to even when we it's a scaling out of 10 sort of, we bring it, it's a scaling sort of a formula on the geopolitical the variable. We have about 4 to 5. We measure 4 to 5 of them. So military has been one of them, external influence, as well as the certain projects now that's coming through the sort of geopolitical influence. For example, the Adani projects in Sri Lanka. So what happened was, initially there was protest, there was corruption issues, even raised by the president of Sri Lanka, who became quite popular by raising them prior to the elections. So then you have the international, the whole thing against Adani, so like that. I mean, that's a significant data point in Sri Lanka. So like that, we look at it. We try to sort of bring in. So your question was very important on the military.
How can you use the index to help the nation? And can this index also be used by authoritarians to manipulate?
Dr. Castor's question is a very important question when it comes to Cambodia. So I was there twice in Cambodia. We did look at, again, the 4 variables, how has Cambodia. So if you look at Cambodia clearly, CPI, Corruption Perception Index, is at 21, which is very, very low in terms, which means very corrupt. CPI has given a very low mark. Then our economic crime severity, they're very high. It's an 8, actually much more than Philippines. Maybe because of the online gambling stuff that's going on. And, I mean, a lot of corruption, organized crime, as well as other stuff, as well as money laundering. If you look at all those areas, so it's at 8. Then public response has been 7. Again, here is the thing. So the autocratic kind of a regime in play, but then we see that the anger is, although hidden, it can trigger at any moment. There is a significant sort of frustration in terms of public response. Geopolitical influence, they have scored about 5 because of the autocratic the regime in play. They managed to suppress anything coming from outside, external, because external forces or anything that is coming in, as well as their tilt towards, of course, their ironclad, they call the ironclad brothers, which is China. So there is clearly one kind of a geopolitical influence, suppress the others, other influences coming into the country. So there's no balance, of course. We don't see a balance in Cambodia. So like that, you'll see several countries. Myanmar is another case. Then you have, so we take these ASEAN and South Asian countries. So our index has only looked at this region. The reason is that we want to improve on this particular region first, then we move to the other regions of the world. So what we need is like support from the journalists, from when we go to these countries to help us understand, to improve the index. So index is, we want to reverse the process of developing indexes actually, or like the CPI or whatever were done in the past. I mean, of course, a lot of respect for them. We want to sort of pass this index to the people. We want them to own it actually. If you think that we have been wrong in one of those variables that no, it requires, we can of course discuss. We it's yours, right? So we are not building something it's not something prescriptive. So we can develop it together. We always invite the government, the oppositions. If there is any sort of anything that needs improvement, we are open for that. And we want people to own it. And so I think it's the first time that we are creating something like this. It's still on the test case, but then I'm sure we will be able to develop it together, and countries can learn. If the father and son is at the ruling seat, if the two brothers are in the ruling seat, if entire family is in the ruling, so it's that time is over, I believe. So people require, the young generation requires more. I would say they've seen the world from social media. That's why there's a huge anger on the social media. And that pirate appearing in on the streets, the symbol pirate appearing. We even looked at that. So the animation figure, from the cartoons, and why these younger people are carrying this banner. They want this is a pirate that does good to the society, as well as it fights the governments. But then the regimes, so regimes are very fragile in this. I would say uh, in this sort of the time of our world, because of the social media, the openness, as well as the thinking that they have. Amazing. The Nepalese case was very, very interesting. The youth, the inequality, there was no jobs. Foreign employment was the biggest earner of that country. So Nepalese go out as foreign workers and bring in the remittances, and then the country's elite has been sort of, they have not sort of shared among the youth what they have. Basically, the investments have been quite low. There's geopolitical pressure from India and China. So the Nepal is a very unique case there. Filipinos also the same, I would say, because when it comes to Filipino workers on remittances, about the jobs that are created in the society, inequality. Now, this is our index opens up a big question about society's inequality because of elite capture, mainly captured by, say, Chinese projects, or captured by external influencers like the politicians, for example. There have been we see a geopolitical index that is very high, but then in one particular country that and the external force has sort of captured the political elites of that country. So how don't we bring it in? I mean, we need to bring it in, right? So the issue is that we don't have in the world, right, what we live right now, we don't have an index to bring in all this. We need to bring in to see the whole picture, we need to bring in. But the challenge is how do we sort of, improve, once we bring in the data points, how do we improve it? How do we improve it sort of, regularly, as well as when there is cases, when there's spikes in the situations of a country, like, a scandal or large scale. So how do we bring this in? So I think we need to find mechanisms. I believe the Millennium Project has that strength because of the the large organization present more than in 70 countries, as well as the amazing scholars. There, I mean, Sherman Cruz has been in Philippines, many others in the region who have sort of dedicated their lives or the research or the research for the society, the foresight, to show the people, look, there is something called the foresight. We need to understand foresight analysis. The importance of foresight is important because once you have a regime that is not listening to the people, to these important reports, you would see you are inviting, because why would you want to have a full collapse? Now, Sri Lanka, if you look at the case of Sri Lanka right now, after the collapse, people are still struggling because of high taxes, IMF, they come in, poverty rates have not improved in Sri Lanka. They stabilized the country, yes.
Yeah,
But
just a quick insight that I have, right? Like, and reflecting on what's going on in the Philippines, and one question probably as well. Now, I see is that what the Philippine government is trying to do at this point is to prevent escalation, right? So, in order for the government to actually prevent further escalation and this, and I saw this as a news headline yesterday, is put massive investment in social welfare, right? And I think in the last 20 years, I would say the government has done a good job of outsourcing employment, right? Like, for example, business process outsourcing, just to have, your probably the middle class gain jobs, probably not, dignified or what, as long as that they can generate income. And of course, in the 1970s, the overseas foreign workers, the OFW, right, to prevent escalation of civil chaos. And I saw in a news headline today or just yesterday that the president is planning, to put 200 billion into social welfare, right? Have you seen that, Castor? So I think what the government
Away from the
is trying
flood
to do now
control,
is,
away from the budget on flood control, they diverted it to social welfare. Yes.
yes, yes, I think that is the pattern, I think. And I'm not sure if it will work at this point. We will see, in the coming months. Now, going back to your index, just one question, particularly for the Philippines. What suggestion or advice would you give us? What particular indicator should we closely monitor, right? To monitor if if it increases or the index decreases. What are the variables that we should closely monitor? In
well,
our case,
yes, economic crime severity is clearly you're 7. The value that you have received is about 7. So you need to look at it very seriously, which is due to this, the ghost projects or the corruption that's in the society. So as well as the external force, which is at 6. There again, you'd have to work on. There is an external force, of course, very clearly, and China is part of that clearly, because of Philippines, engagement to sort of sustain a rules-based norm, as well as the South China Sea when it comes to the issue. So I think that variable is all at 6. But I believe the government is doing a fairly good job in there. I mean, being critical on, of course, the economic crime severity. Public response is also at 6. Look, now it moved. From so this response is getting more sort of angry. People are getting angry. It could reach the level of Nepal, which was at 9. Now 6 to 9. How fast would it move? It depends on the mobilization of the people, how the government is responding. Like you mentioned, like they have quickly tried to address, giving funds as well as working towards. Okay, we have
Dr.
gone
Zanga,
wrong.
we have only one last minute. Sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah,
just
so that
just
that that
one.
that quick response is important.
Yes, just one quick question. You mentioned about brothers, ruling families. Do you see the end of dynasties and nepotism?
Clearly. So I see it in many countries that the younger generations have rejected this because here's the thing. So there is ways and mechanisms to do it. I don't think the political elites have understood the sophistication or the methods that is required. Again, fair dialogue with the society. Okay, if there are sons who wants to come in, what requires is honesty, transparency. Leadership can be more like in the Singapore style of Lee Kuan Yew. I would like to sort of bring it up. What they want is very humble
Leadership.
leaders who does
Yes.
not build their own basically their wealth, but give the wealth back to the people.
That's a
Isn't it
nice.
very
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Zanga, for. So we're now at the end of our program. So we would like to thank you for guesting and giving us immensely important insights for the country based on the index that you've presented. So, Prof. Sherman, do you have your last words before we end the show?
Yeah, thank you very much, Asanga, for sharing with us, and we look forward to learning and collaborating with you on this. I think this index is very critical and crucial at this point. As you said, the country can actually work on this, and you're hoping that it will be owned, by the societies that will, apply this index.
So magandang hapon po
thank
at
you.
tayo po ay magtatapos na po ng ating programa. So sana ay marami kayong natutunan mula sa ating mga pinag-usapan at pagdasal po natin na ang ating bansa ay magiging mas mapayapa at mas matagumpay tayo na matatanggal na ang korupsyon dito sa ating mahal na bayan. So magkita-kita na naman po tayo sa susunod na linggo dito lang po sa programa na kung saan ang siyensya ay buhay. Maraming salamat po. Thank you, Dr.
Maraming
Zanga.
salamat. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherman. Thank you for that.